Hello, and welcome everyone to our event today. My name is Marwa Fatafta. I'm the MENA Policy and Advocacy Manager at Access Now. Welcome to anyone who's joining us, wherever you are. Today's event is happening on on a very important backdrop. Saudi Arabia has a long-standing record of human rights violations, and in recent years, its digital authoritarianism has escalated to unprecedented levels. Scores of people have been arrested for merely expressing their views online in a country where a tweet can land you in prison for 45 years. It's against this backdrop, the Internet Governance Forum, or the IGF, will take place this Sunday on December 15th, where delegates from states, governments, companies, and civil society gather to discuss the future of the Internet and digital public policy. And for the first time in 15 years, Access Now have decided not to attend IGF in person. And it's a decision that we did not take lightly, but it's really imperative given the ongoing human rights crisis in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi authorities have been known for weaponizing international fora, such as the IGF, or most recently, the news from yesterday, now the World Cup, in order to promote a facade of tolerance and progress and to whitewash their abuses. And we do refuse to be used or instrumentalized to normalize or overlook this repression under the guise of multi-stakeholderism. And so far, our civil society demands to the Saudi authorities to release all political prisoners or prisoners of conscience and to provide safe, clear guarantees for the safe and free participation for civil society and activists, including a statement that we have released jointly with civil society partners, have been unmet. There are civil society partners who are attending, which is really a call to highlight the human rights abuses and the track record of the Saudi authorities in the discussions that will commence over the next week. For those reasons, we think it's really more critical than ever to shed light on the country's rising digital repression and human rights abuses. While delegates from states or companies are packing their bags to fly to Riyadh, maybe tomorrow or on Sunday, it's very important for them to listen to Saudi activists and experts who have been tracking and documenting the recent waves of repression in the country. And for today's discussion, we're very honored to have with us, I'll start with you, Hala, to introduce you quickly, Dr. Hala Al-Dosari, who is a scholar and an activist from Saudi Arabia, based in the US. Egregious Sadhan, who is an activist and sister to Abdurrahman Sadhan, who's a Red Cross humanitarian worker. He was kidnapped and forcibly disappeared in 2018 during a mass crackdown on critics and rights activists in Saudi Arabia, and continues to be detained. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, followed by, I believe, 20 years of travel ban. And lastly, we have with us today Michael Page, who is the Deputy Director for the Middle East and North Africa at Human Rights Watch. Welcome, everyone. Before we kick off our discussion, just a quick note to our audience that if you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to have time towards the end of the discussion to answer any comments or questions you may have. And I will start with you, Hala. As I mentioned, the Saudi regime, and especially after the ascension of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he has set into motion a number of economic and social reforms under his so-called Vision 2030. And the IGF also comes as part of that package where Saudi Arabia wants to position itself as a leader in technology and innovation, not only regionally, but also on global stage. However, under the facade of progress, as I mentioned in my introduction remarks, Saudi Arabia had witnessed unprecedented human rights crisis. So could you maybe provide a landscape for our discussion today and an overview of the recent wave of repression in the country?
Yeah, thank you, Marwa. Thank you for having us this important event preceding the IGF. So Vision 2030 was mainly an economic reform in its sense. It came shortly after the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, announced that the rentier state economy, which basically is the oil-based economy in Saudi Arabia, is headed towards bankruptcy. And that led to basically a thinking that taxation, austerity measures need to be in place in order to support basically the economy of the state. And thus came a lot of the so-called reforms in terms of, allowing more access for women into the workforce, ease of the restrictions in women's autonomy. Basically, Saudi Arabia was the latest country in abolishing the women driving ban. And of course, there were some kinds of policies that has been in place, such as the permission of a male guardian for women to access certain government services, such as hospitalization, obtaining official documentation, such as IDs or travel documents, being able to enroll in certain educational opportunities or work opportunities. All of these issues have been eased under the pretext of Vision 2030, but the whole pretext was to make sure that the government is not burdened by a lot of the, the social, if you would think of it, a social protection system or social welfare system, in which a lot of the people have been under the support of the government for no other reason of being, in need other than being a woman. So in a sense, the austerity measure that have been in place is basically to enrich the economy, to make sure that women have the ability to take care of themselves and not being a burden to the state. But in a sense as well, the Vision 2030 did not ease basically the situations, the living conditions of women in which they were subjected to certain types of oppression because of the tradition, because of the patriarchal system in which they live on. And this is something that I've hinted to in my writings in foreign affairs when I commented on the ease of restrictions on women because of the male guardianship system. That there are two classes of women. Some of them are living under the traditional system of, the patriarchal system or the conservative system in which women are supposed to be subservient or to follow the wishes of the male guardians and their own system. If they challenge those kinds of, demands in their own living conditions, they might be faced by, charges of disobedience, which is admissible in courts, in Saudi courts. Now, how that changed for women from supportive families? Of course, they are now living, with much, ease of integration into the public spaces. But did that mean, or did that change the situation for women from supportive families? No. Women from supportive families would still have to face the restrictions from the government in terms of surveillance, in terms of expressions of their own opinions. So the government is actually expanding basically the surveillance of the public spaces, especially digital spaces, in which This is the only space, the digital space or the social media. This is the only space in which Saudi citizens are able to express their own opinions or their own demands on the government. So we have been witnessing since the arrival of the de facto ruler Mohammed bin Salman to power an increased surveillance of the public spaces and the digital spaces. Most of the people who have been in prison over the last few years or the last decades, basically, is because of the expression of opinion under the pretext of, uh, violation of the cybersecurity laws or the counterterrorism law. And these people have not been, using any means of violence or any means of, aggressive stance against the government. They were just merely expressing their opinions. So if you go to the Vision 2030, you will be surprised by the buzzwords that is being displayed there, that the government is actually trying to create this kind of vibrant society or space for vibrant society or a thriving economy or an ambitious nation. All of these things are just a facade, because if you think of something like a hashtag that Saudi citizens are used to actually post online, especially on X or Twitter, something like unemployment, for instance. Unemployment is really a problem among youth. And this is something that whoever has been actually leading the discussion on those kinds of hashtags have been targeted and have been, harshly sentenced. Women who have been trying to, monetize their accounts, but had some kinds of inclining towards supporting some kinds of women movement or women rights, such as a thriving nation or a vibrant society. All of these things have actually been harshly targeted. So the words are something, but the action are completely different. So this is quite ironic. And we do remember Fawza Al-Ataibi, for instance, who was one of the women that I've interviewed. And she told me that when she tried to renew her permission, and this is another thing that people who are trying to, Saudi young people who are trying to monetize their digital accounts, they have to obtain a permit from the government. And this permit, in a sense, is the license of the government to basically survey those people, survey their accounts and activities. It's actually people who are actually admitting that their accounts are, in a sense, very influential, that they are actually trying to monetize them. So Fawza Al-Ataibi was one of those people, a young woman who was living outside of Saudi Arabia. And she was asked to go inside Saudi Arabia, to go back to Saudi Arabia in order to renew her permit. When she did, she said that she was subjected to a brutal interrogation about her activity and why she's not following, the tribal tradition and the values of the Saudi women. Of course, she said that we are in a different society based on the Vision 2030. We are, leading a life that is modern based on our own choices. But then the interrogator told her these things are not for you as a Saudi woman. These are aimed towards people who are coming to invest or tourists. They are not for you as a person. And now we remember the people who were forcibly removed from their own land, such as Abdurrahim al-Hawiti and other people of the Hawiti tribes from Neom, in order to make room for major projects or mega projects for tourism. Those people have been brutally imprisoned for years or killed, as in the case of Abdurrahim al-Hawiti. Similarly, in the case of Fawza Al-Ataibi, she had to basically leave the country and seek asylum outside in order to, protect herself from imprisonment, because both of her sisters, who have supported previously, the women movement, One of them is imprisoned for years, for 11 years, and one of them is banned from travel perpetually without any way for her to basically object or challenge, the issue. So what we're seeing is two classes of people, or basically the Vision 2030 is made for two classes of people who have been supporting basically the movement for rights and movements for reforms and modernization, who have been brutally persecuted, and the other people who have been basically creating this kind of facade, as I've mentioned, of modernization or reform, bringing in all kinds of celebrities into Saudi Arabia in order to show that there is actually some kinds of a change. But in reality, there is not much of a change for those people who are actually seeking meaningful reforms or change.
Thank you very much, Hala. I did want to ask you a question about the discrepancy between what Saudi Arabia wants to build as an image around showing itself as a moderate country and providing more freedoms to women. And so thank you for addressing that, and also the point on this creation of a kind of a two-class system, which is a good segue to my next question to Yahya. And Yahya, I'm really glad that you were able to join us. We were not sure if you would make it, so maybe I'll quickly introduce you now to our audience. For those who don't know, Yahya Al-Asiri, he is a Saudi human rights activist, a founder of Al-Qist, which is a Saudi human rights organization based in the UK. And he has a lot of stories to share regarding repression. So Yahya, as I mentioned, next week or this Sunday, people will gather in Riyadh for the IGF. And it's really worth noting here that many Saudi activists and civil society actors living in exile, like yourself and Hala and Arij, who are not able to visit their home country, are not able to participate in IGF discussions or raise human rights issues related to the state, digital authoritarianism and repression. So could you share with us what are the restrictions and threats that are faced by Saudi civil society that are working inside and outside of the country?
Thank you so much, Marwa and Access Now and everyone, and sorry for being late. Yes, in Saudi Arabia, the situation is completely different than even repressed country like the repressed country in our neighborhood. Saudi Arabia, there is no any civil society spaces. There is no NGOs, no political parties, no even clear codified legal law. There is no constitutions. There is no any segregation between the powers inside the country. And there is no one can say anything inside the country without it was in the past, nobody can say anything against the regime. Right now, there's no one can say anything not completely matching with the regime. Even people if they are famous or something, they are not allowed even to choose to be silent. People they chose to be silent in the past, especially during the issue and the crisis with Qatar. They have been integrated and they have been imprisoned and they have been investigated and they have been punished for that. So this is the situation inside the country. But the world, they don't know about it, or they trying to don't know about it because there is a huge amount of money with the Saudi regime and they are paying for the PR and they success with the PR, unfortunately. So all the human rights defenders inside the country, all people, all the political reformers, they are in prison or they have been imprisoned in the past. Some of them, they have faced torture, sexual harassment. Some of them, they have been died inside the prison. And some of them, they have been killed outside the country, like Jamal Khashoggi. And Jamal Khashoggi, because he was in the consulate in Istanbul, everyone knows about the story, and it's become very popular. But people, they have been killed inside the prison, like we call him the father for the reformers, Dr. Abdullah Al-Hamid, have been killed inside the prison. Unfortunately, there is no enough highlight in his story, basically because the PR for the regime, and basically because people, they are not really care about what's going inside the country. This is about what's inside the country. For the people outside the country, thank you for your question. If you take this question and pass it to the Saudi regime, or if you pass it to them in Sunday, they will say, no, they are welcome and they can attend and come to their country, and nobody will do anything for them, whether Yahya or Hala or Arij or anyone. However, we always receiving that if you are a real reformer, you need to be in your homeland, you need to be in your country, and nobody will do anything against you if you are a human rights defender or a reformer, because they claim Mohammed bin Salman is a reformer. However, our colleagues and friends, they have been not just in prison, but they have been also killed, as I mentioned about Abdullah Al-Hamid, and people, they left the prison, like Dr. Suleiman al-Rashidi. He was one of the biggest reformer in the country. Nobody can hear anything about him because, unfortunately, he's very ill. He's in a very bad situation, and a lot of people, they left the prison. They are not able to share or to do anything or to ask for any reform because they are not in very good health, or because they are under huge threat. So this is, I tried to summarize, this is the situation. It is impossible to say anything. And within this frame, there's people, they are keep saying, there's people happy about the reform from Mohammed bin Salman, or agree with Mohammed bin Salman or with the regime. And there is people, they are disagree with him. And it looks like, for especially the Western audience, they try to present it, or the Western media, they try to present it as two-point of view, and there is disagreement between the people. However, it's not like that at all. It is about people, they are not allowed to express their opinion at all. And if there is, for example, if the regime success to force the majority of the people to enhance the regime and to be with Mohammed bin Salman in the picture at least, and if there is another people, they struggle and fight to say the reality and to tell the truth. It's not two-point of view. It is one point of view with the struggle, with the challenge, with very, very high price, and the other people, they are working also under pressure to praise the regime and to enhance the regime.
Thank you very much, Yahya. And I wanted, I kind of alluded to my next question when I introduced you. Just to zoom in a bit about into the digital repression, Hala talked and yourself talked about people who are imprisoned because of their opinions. There are also people who have been surveilled, and the Saudi regime is a notorious user or abuser, I should say, of surveillance technologies. And you yourself have been a victim of targeted spyware attack, namely the malicious spyware Pegasus, manufactured by the Israeli company NSO Group. So maybe if you can share with us about the attack that, or maybe the attacks, I should say, that you have been subject to, and how did that impact you, and on a personal level, but also on your work as a human rights activist that documents human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, and of course needs to be in contact with possibly people on the ground. So if you can shed light on your in your experience.
Yep. Basically, I've been targeted so many times, at least 7 times, have documented and filed in the showcase in the front of the UK court or judicial system. But when they are when the regime targeting me, they are not targeting me because myself, it's because the work that we are doing and the people that we are contacting in the country. We used to contact people even from inside the prisons. We tried our best for us as human rights defenders outside the country to represent the people inside, while there is no way to defend the human rights from inside. And in the past, there is a discussion between the human rights defenders and the reformers inside the country. And I remember Dr. Abdullah Al-Hamid and so many of our friends like Walid Abul Khair, Mohammed Badr Qahtani, they insist at that time that we need to defend the human rights from inside the country and to keep push for the reform from inside. However, the regime, they told all of us there is no way to work from inside. So we tried our best to work from outside, but we need to fill the gap and to keep the contact within the people inside. And so the regime, when they are targeting us, they targeted the people inside by prisons and by torture and by also death penalty, etc. And they are targeting us to silence everyone. They don't want anyone to tell the truth. They just want to keep what the government telling the people. And for that, they used everything. In my court case, they used against me 3 spywares. Mainly, they used the Pegasus from NSO, the Israeli company, and the other one is from Quadrim, another Israeli company. And the third one, it is undefined until now. So we're still looking for the third spyware they have been used. And the first one registered, they hacked me before, but the first one registered and we started with it. It was in May 2018. And after that, there is mass arrest for several human rights defenders and women rights defenders. And there is the murder for Jamal Khashoggi and several cases. So, and that's put us in difficult situation because we are not going to stop our work. If we stop our work, that's what the regime is trying to do. But that's put a lot of pressure on us because we need to be careful, not about ourselves, but even about the people inside the country and the people working with us. Also about our family and the vulnerable people around us. And this is really affecting not our situation, but I believe the human rights situation in the country. If we are not able to document the violations, if we are not able, for example, to know what's going on inside the prisons, if we are not able to know who are in the death row and who are under severe torture or in prison without fair trial, if we are not able to document all of that with our partners organizations, that means the dictator regime, they will feel they will feel free without any accountability, and they will keep going with the repression. It will keep increase from time to time. And this is what we have noticed. For example, the very clear example, this year, the death penalty at this moment, it's exceeded 309, and this is one of the highest records in the Saudi history. And this number, while lots of Western officials, they keep saying Mohammed bin Salman is a reformer. And next week, in Monday, we will see Keir Starmer in Saudi Arabia, visiting Saudi Arabia. He's already in the Middle East right now. And in Monday, he will be in Saudi Arabia to negotiate some dealing and businesses with Saudi Arabia. So they already normalized the relation with Mohammed bin Salman. He was under the spot after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. But right now, they keep saying he learned the lesson and he stopped the violations. And nobody care about 309. They already executed that. I think 309, it was 2 days ago. So maybe the number already exceeded that already. So this is very clear example how the regime going from worse to worse, unfortunately. And there's a lot of people, even from the media, they keep saying there is no mass arrest like before. We are not hearing about any mass arrest like before. Basically, it's not because the regime learned the lesson, as they said, or as they want to say, but because there is no more people to be arrested.
Yeah, really well put, Yahya. And also, I keep thinking that if Jamal Khashoggi's murder, which really shocked the world back in 2018, if it happened this year, I really highly doubt that the IGF would have proceeded as such, or even the World Cup. But somehow the world has decided to conveniently turn the page, even though no one has been held accountable for his murder yet. Not to mention, of course, the fact that, as you mentioned, hundreds of people have been executed, and there's no one left in the country, indeed, to be arrested and prosecuted anymore. Speaking of detention, we're gonna now move on to you, Arish, to discuss further the ways in which the Saudi authorities silence dissent. And we've, in the introduction, I've mentioned already that your brother Abdurrahman Sadhan, he is also another victim of the Saudi state's unlawful surveillance and crackdown on dissent, and currently is unjustly imprisoned for his tweets. And we should maybe, if you can also share the details about his case, because it also happened around the time when the Saudi authorities infiltrated the headquarters of Twitter to gather information about Saudi dissidents. So could you share with us, how do the Saudi authorities monitor and control what people say and do online, in addition to, of course, to what we heard from Yahya with regards to the use of spyware?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Marwa and Access Now, for hosting this event. Very important event just before the IGF. I want to mention, while Saudi Arabia is preparing to host the Internet Governance Forum in Riyadh, not too far is Al Hayr political prison, where my brother Abdurrahman Sadhan and many political prisoners are imprisoned there for decades and tortured for nothing but for tweeting or expressing their opinions online. My brother was kidnapped in 2018, just about 6 months after just about 6 months before the horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and was forcibly disappeared. During his disappearance, he was brutally tortured and held incommunicado. During the torture, they beside the electric shocks and beating and all the horrible abuses during the torture, the interrogators were asking him, they broke his hand and saying, "Is this the hand you tweeted with?" Just shows you that, how severely or how aggressively the Saudi officials are in their ways in cracking down on freedom of speech, on anyone who dare to, criticize even satirical tweets or just, lightly, expressing their opinions on social media, and specifically in my brother's case on Twitter. And then he was held for 3 years without any charge. And after 3 years, he was brought to a secret sham trial and got sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, followed by 20 years travel ban, all based on tweets dating back more than a decade ago. Tweets that he posted while he was a student here in the United States. So it's not even something that was recent or something that was just, after after MBS implemented the new anti-terrorism and counterterrorism and financing law, which was in 2017. So even according to Saudi laws, that sentencing doesn't make sense and doesn't apply. So yes, and to go to your points about the cyber security threats and the hacking, my brother was basically kidnapped and taken by the Saudi officials after they actually hacked Twitter, implemented as allegedly listed in different reports online, and by also cases in the United States. Those Saudi spies were implanted in Twitter headquarters office in San Francisco, where they managed to leak more than around 5,000 users' accounts, including my brother, and targeted a lot of these actives that they wanted to silence, and disappeared them. There are many other cases, like my brother Abdurrahman. There's Turki Al-Jasser, a journalist who continue to be disappeared, and many other cases similar to my brother. So to this day, my brother continued to be forcibly disappeared. It's nearly in next March is going to be 7 years. It's more than 6 years now that we haven't been able to hear or see my brother, at least here, my family here in the US. And we continue to be barred completely from any communication or even to know how he's doing. I just want to also mention that we tried everything we can in the first year and continuously even after that to reach out to Saudi officials inside the country. We tried to reach out to organizations, human rights organizations, as they call them, inside the country, they're not really human rights organizations. They're used to hide the abuses. And this is exactly what happened with us. The human rights organizations we reached out, they weren't able to help us. And instead, they were used to lie to the United Nations about, that they were attending the hearings, my brother's trial, which wasn't true. It was completely secret. And none of the human rights organizations or inside Saudi Arabia were actually there. So unfortunately, they're used to hide the abuses, to cover the abuses, and to be used as a mechanism to put a different story to the organizations, human rights organizations outside the governments that are asking about these abuses, the United Nations. So unfortunately, the situation in Saudi Arabia, there is, like Yahya mentioned and Hala, there's no real civil societies or human rights organizations or any organizations that can protect people's rights and freedoms and basic human rights, dignity. So yeah, unfortunately, my brother Abdurrahman continues to be forcibly disappeared to today. I think the IGF is a very good chance to bring these issues to light because it's around the internet governance and the principles of internet governance. Actually, all these actions are being taken against a lot of innocent people in Saudi Arabia goes against the principles of internet governance. And this is a good opportunity to bring these issues into light and to discuss them frankly and openly with the Saudis.
Thank you so much, Arij, and also for shedding light on what we call these gingos, these governmental, non-governmental organizations that play a role in whitewashing and supporting the narrative of the regime that there is existing civil society in the country that freely participates, but in fact it just covers the crimes and abuses committed by the authorities. You've also mentioned in your brother's case, maybe to go a bit deeper into how the authorities weaponize national laws in order to silence dissent and prosecute individuals unjustly. So it looks maybe in the facade of it, it looks like there is a rule of law or a due process, but could you speak to us about the weaponization of draconian or repressive laws to prosecute individuals for their speech or other activities online?
Yeah, absolutely. So Saudi Arabia have always used the anti-cybercrime law, even before MBS, to silence critical voices. But after MBS, there was a new law that was put in place in October 2017, called counterterrorism and financing law, if I got that correct. So unfortunately, a lot of the people who are today forcibly disappeared and kidnapped and imprisoned are sentenced under that law to decades and many years. And my brother's case, for example, he was sentenced under both of these laws to 20 years imprisonment, followed by 20 years travel ban for nothing but running satirical Twitter accounts, which basically were of decades ago, more than 10 years ago. Tweets and even the accounts were created very long time ago when he was here in the United States. So even according to the Saudi laws, it doesn't apply, or it doesn't really make sense. If there was real justice, if it was real, court system and fairness, because whatever happened before 2017 that law should not be used on old tweets. If we're talking about, we're going to sentence people for tweeting, which shouldn't be the case. We should be protecting freedom of speech. But unfortunately, these laws are being used as just to, in front of the world to justify and to add a legal context to why the Saudi government are abusing people's rights and imprisoning, innocent people. So unfortunately, this is the case, or this is the situation we have right now. You will see similarities between all the different cases. Even the text itself, very similar. It's like copy and paste for each case, using words that are related to counterterrorism and financing, and charges that are made up, all based on innocent tweets that were posted years and years ago.
And my last question to you, maybe very briefly. So one might say, well, if you're not a human rights defender or a political dissident, you can float safely in the country. But we've seen in recent years that you don't need to be really a political dissident or an activist in order to become a target for state repression. So how does the Saudi government try to restrict other walks of life, such as, for example, entertainment, art, or artists, just to also shed light on, let's say, non-political or non-human rights related activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about people who are not even known as a political, activist or human rights activist. In my brother's case, he was tweeting an anonymous Twitter account. He wasn't even, promoting himself as an activist. He was just going about his normal life, and every once in a while, he just felt like, expressing his opinion like the rest of the world on social media. So like my brother's case, there are many cases who were imprisoned, especially in the recent years, for running comical or satirical kind of online content, and some of those cases that I can mention, a cartoonist. The cartoonist Muhammad al-Hazza, he was sentenced to 23 years without appeal for basically creating comic cartoons, very innocent, indirectly criticizing issues that are, affecting Saudi citizens, like unemployment, which Hala mentioned earlier, or the high expenses of life that people cannot, handle anymore. And for basically contributing these cartoons to a Qatari channel or a Qatari, outlet. And so this is one case. Another case is podcaster Yasser al-Huzaymi. He was also sentenced to 13 years imprisonment, followed by 30 years travel ban, if I got that correctly. And that was after he shared a show on Netflix that was also comical, that was satirical of certain issues, whether for the Saudi citizens or in general. But that just shows you that Saudi government doesn't have any understanding of arts or tolerance to even satirical, comic kind of very light criticism. In my brother's case, his entire account was satirical, mocking basically the Saudi religious establishment and laws that are oppressing people, using these laws to oppress people, and people found it very funny. So he had a huge following, although he wasn't famous, or he wasn't really a known activist. But such cases get punished very severely because they have that talent where they could actually make people laugh laugh and make people, see the actual issues that are happening in the country. It should be actually an outlet, because people will at some point will explode if they cannot, laugh at the situation happening around them. So unfortunately, the Saudi government doesn't understand that art and goes after these people who are very talented in other country. They'll be actually awarded, and they'll be respected, but unfortunately not in Saudi Arabia. A third example I want to share, it's not only the Saudi citizens or local citizens who are targeted. One interesting example is Saudi Arabia had Netflix take down an episode called the Patriotic Act that was shared by a very famous international comedian, Hassan Minhaj. They've taken that episode because it implies some sort of criticism on MBS or like Vision 2030. So even not only Saudis, even like comedy as an art is under, not only comedy, any sort of art that may imply any sort of like criticism on the Saudi officials is not basically lightly accepted by the Saudis, and they will do anything to silence that or to control it, which goes completely against the principles of internet governance and the freedom that it should protect for people, and allowing freedom of expression and all of that.
Thank you very much, Arij. Yeah, indeed, they don't seem to appreciate sense of humor. But now I'm gonna move to you, Michael, because I think it's really important to shed light on the role of the private sector in this conversation, specifically because Vision 2030, at the end of the day, it's mainly an economic reform strategy in which, again, the Saudi authorities want to expand and invest in technology and innovation, and has dedicated a lot of resources into that, and is trying really actively to attract foreign investment, and particularly from big tech companies. And as we've seen in recent years, they have been happy to oblige. But Human Rights Watch has recently published a very detailed and an excellent report, really, that sheds light on the Public Investment Fund, PIF, which is Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, and in facilitating state repression under the control of MBS. Can you share with us the main findings of your investigation, and how is the PIF is linked to human rights abuses and is helping entrenching the state repression in the country?
Absolutely, and it's such a pleasure to be with Arij, Yahya, and Hala on this panel, and I'm greatly appreciative. And I think some of when I listen to them, right, what's implied is this question, right? Why is the IGF being held in Saudi Arabia when there's clear repression of really any type of online dissent? Why is the World Cup being hosted in Saudi Arabia when there's widespread migrant labor abuses? There's all kinds of other serious concerns of abuses against Saudis on both the digital sphere, in person, and things like displaced people as they build. Why is there this quiet over what was a horrific assassination of a prominent Washington Post journalist, only a few years ago? And I think the answer is all wrapped up in this question that Saudi Arabia, and particularly MBS himself, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has this distilled economic power that very few people can match in a sovereign wealth fund that has over $925 billion in it, close to $1 trillion. And I think the bigger issue is that amount of money, which should be the money of the Saudi people and distributed and used in a way for the benefit of the broader public, is really only at the mercy of the decision of one man in terms of how he makes this decision. And so I want to keep it brief, but I just want to note maybe just a few broad points about why are both the private sector as well as other states either blatantly ignoring the human rights policies of Saudi Arabia or even potentially putting themselves at risk of complicity in human rights abuses, right? And it really kind of comes down to this question of Saudi Arabia's economic power and kind of how it's politically structured. So, sovereign wealth funds aren't new. They're over the past like 50 or 60 years. They've been kind of created by governments. They've often been used, at least at its start, as like stabilization funds, right? As prices of oil change, often oil states would use sovereign wealth funds. But the public investment fund that is overseen by Mohammed bin Salman is really strange and novel in the ways that it's being used and its specific links to human rights abuses. So number one, most sovereign wealth funds are not linked in a direct sense to human rights abuses, but based on our research and report, as well as some other great research by Al-Qist and others, what we can say is the public investment fund has abuses from its past, present, and very likely future that are linked to it. So in the past, the most prominent ones is, as part of a 2017, quote unquote, anti-corruption campaign, of which there was no due process, money that was taken over by the state from prominent Saudi businessmen and other elites, likely ended up in the public investment fund without any due process. Part of what was taken over was companies that others had owned and was moved into the public investment fund. A couple of those companies owned the planes that moved the kill team, the Saudi kill team of agents that then murdered Jamal Khashoggi, in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Which again is like it can't be emphasized enough how strange and perverse it is that a sovereign wealth fund is linked that closely to human rights abuses. To reference again Al-Qist's work, right? They've done great work in kind of documenting how in both NEOM, right, which is it's not just a project, it's like a giga project, a series of projects that are happening in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. And Hala mentioned as well, I believe, but like the Huwaita tribe, which is based there, has been forcibly displaced, and in locations such as Jeddah, the Jeddah Central Project has displaced, working class, middle class Saudis as well as migrant workers, and none of them were compensated. Some people were arrested for, protesting. And even now, with Human Rights Watch releasing a report where we've documented widespread migrant labor abuses across geographic sectors and professional sectors, and some of those abuses are happening at PIF-funded sites or PIF-linked businesses. And that's almost certainly now going to continue after, FIFA essentially throwing its human rights policy in the trash and awarding the 2034 to Saudi Arabia, 2034 World Cup to Saudi Arabia without any protections for human rights issues. And so now we have this PIF, this public investment fund, that's going to be linked not only now, but in the future to very serious rights abuses. And I think the broader, concern is that what we've hinted at earlier is that all of this is directed by one person, right? And so the public investment fund is overseen by Mohammed bin Salman without any real institutional checks, right? He's both the chairman of the PIF, but he's also the chairman of the oversight board, CEDA, the development agency that oversees it and that nominates parts of the church. He's also the prime minister that can nominate people to the board. And so there's really no institutional checks, and that's part of a process that both on the political, security, and now economic side, Mohammed bin Salman essentially has kind of a singular level of control. And that doesn't even exist with other large sovereign wealth funds. And I think the key concern and why we were going back to kind of this question of private actors is he can deploy this amount of money without checks, not necessarily for the public good, but to use as much as he wants in terms of using it as a means of influence, as a means of leverage against state actors, against non-state actors, can use it for FIFA, and he uses it also to kind of whitewash Saudi Arabia's image. So I think one of the points that I think Arij and Yahya noted, right? Like, why do we have this question? Why is why aren't more people talking about 300 plus executions that are occurring now in Saudi Arabia? It's you barely see it in kind of news or media coverage. It's barely mentioned even in like when journalists are talking about a FIFA World Cup, right? It's an incredible figure that isn't connected. And I think that the reason is because Saudi Arabia has really deployed its wealth in a way, its public wealth in a way for the private benefit of one individual to kind of whitewash that record. And I think that kind of the last concern I just want to note on the PIF is that not only is it used for to kind of whitewash serious abuses. So why we don't talk about some of these things that the panelists have mentioned, but this is again to emphasize this is what should be given for public good in other when you have public funds, that this is largely coming from oil wealth, they should be used to benefit people in a non-discriminatory manner as much as possible. Even the UN has found that there are poverty rates in Saudi Arabia that exceed other Gulf countries. The problem is we don't actually have great data about poverty because it's one of these issues. It's just like you can't have jokes, can't have humor, there are high restrictions. You can't do, strong research that's publicly available on questions like poverty. And so researchers are highly restricted. It's very difficult to access, but it is like this big question, which is why is this wealth being used, for instance, on NEOM, which is now scaling back, doesn't really make sense as a project, according to many people. Why are you then harming people for it? But why aren't you using that money for a whole range of other purposes that's possible? And I think that's this really big question. And I want to say that lastly is that, part of when you work with the Public Investment Fund, after hearing from others and kind of like what research we've been able to do as Human Rights Watch, I think what you can see is there really needs to be an incredibly high due diligence standard for other businesses, because there really are no protections that are going to be carried out by the PIF itself on the migrant labor issue, on Saudi citizens, on kind of forced displacement. And so there absolutely needs to have businesses, including internet companies that we can get to, do their own due diligence if they're going to be working in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you so much, Michael. And that's a good segue to my second question, which is on an issue you and I have been working very closely on. We've witnessed over the last couple of years, big tech companies really are in some sort of a gold rush to invest in Saudi Arabia, and particularly to build cloud regions or cloud centers and infrastructure. Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, and most recently, I think Cisco have all either started or announced plans to build these projects. And as you said, we are talking about an extremely closed country. There are no checks and balances. There's no rule of law, abuse all over the place, and also lack of access to information. And so can you shed light on the implications of those types of projects and how can these companies can find themselves complicit in possible human rights abuses or entrenching the digital, or let me say even repression, because while we're focusing, of course, on digital repression because of our particular focus as an organization, but there are a host of other rights that are being violated, on a social and economic levels.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it. Again, I think what is kind of wild and part of like my disbelief is that the Saudi recent track record of having Pegasus software targeting people on this call for spying on what was formerly known as Twitter, and that and perhaps putting at risk individuals who were talking about as part of activists that are now detained, that those facts are not in dispute. And yet people are setting up cloud services where there's absolutely no protections. There is no type of like checks and balances. For me, it's just like, it's hard to believe, especially since many of the companies we're talking about, including Google, say that they have human rights policies and that they are concerned about, their own trying to mitigate or protect from being complicit in human rights harm. So for me, the whole question doesn't square with, once you're putting, for instance, cloud services, in Saudi Arabia, you are automatically putting at now a higher level of risk individuals whose personal identities, might be revealed. You're putting pressure on employees that might be based there. You're putting at risk because you're putting infrastructure in a country that has none of these protections. So I think that's the kind of overwhelming concern, and one that I hope is a message, at the IGF itself, which is, why are companies doing this and potentially putting themselves, putting employees, and putting Saudi citizens and other residents at risk by like hosting these like cloud regions and other infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, when they are blatantly spying on internet companies writ large and have a terrible track record of online expression. It just doesn't add up in any way. So I think there's a challenge around shaming them, given what we talked about. The financial incentives are massive, but I think it's really important to be emphasizing the level of risks that they are taking on when they do this. And that's what I hope, one of the messages from the IGF that kind of comes out is that, what are you putting at risk when you're putting your infrastructure in Saudi Arabia in the current political and human rights context?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And on that note, we are coming to a close for our session. So I do want to make sure that those who are listening to us, and particularly government representatives or delegations or companies that are planning to go to the IGF and participate, whether remotely or in person, that that you have the opportunity to share very concrete, probably issues or recommendations. So I'll give each one of you maybe 1 to 2 minutes max. And I'll practice some ruthless moderation here, because we have some questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we have time to answer those. So Hala, I'll start with you quickly. So how can we end the normalization of Saudi's repression through hosting these huge events and international fora? And what accountability measures can and should civil society and state delegates call for while attending the IGF next week?
I would say that it would be better not to basically engage with the Saudi government. That would send a more concrete message that the nations of the world are not really, co-opting with repression, with digital repression, particularly as one of the themes in IGF 2024 is on advancing human rights and inclusion in the digital age. One of the 4 themes that would be discussed. But if not, we should really bring into, or delegates of other countries should bring up the names of all the people who have been imprisoned for advocating for human rights. Some of those people we've mentioned in this session, but others can be found on the list of, human rights organizations such as Al-Qist and Human Rights Watch and Access Now and others who have signed a petition, basically requesting the government to reconsider their engagement with the Saudi regime, because we don't want to whitewash. We don't want to use those kinds of occasions to help the Saudi government whitewash. The other thing is to, beside raising these issues, also to engage with the Saudi, basically write reports after the event, to basically say what have been discussed, off the record, if there is any kind of discussion. From my own experience, we just witnessed, in the last few days in Muscat, Oman, an event of ESCWA, which is basically the Economic and Cultural, UN organization, and also with the UN Women, in which they reviewed the Arab countries' commitment to Beijing Declaration, and how much progress, so-called progress, have been made on women's issues. And none of those, countries have actually been progressing in inclusion of women human rights defenders, including the UN Women. So those events are just for whitewashing rather than for actual meaningful inclusion of, citizens or nations. So I think engagement is really not helpful at all. it just, increases this kind of, facade of, claims of the countries of being reformative while they're not.
Thank you very much, Hala. I'll move on to Yahya, so we'll go in the same order we had for the discussion. So similar to my question to Hala, so what are the demands of Saudi civil society for those attending the IGF? And maybe if you can also share what can be done to hold perpetrators of unlawful surveillance, both governments and also the companies that provide these hacking tools and spyware to them.
As Hala mentioned, and to stop normalization with the regime as nothing happened, and to remember while they are in Riyadh, they are just a few kilometers from Al Hire, as Arij mentioned, whereas Abdurrahman Sadhan have been forced to disappear for years, and others, and there is people they have been killed there, and there is mass executions just a few kilometers from the forum. So if the people they are attending, they keep remember this, they need to be vocal, and they need to be honest to talk about the violations and to try to shame those violators, and not just being allowing the regime to use them as a tool for the whitewashing, and to remind them about the one-man show that, as mentioned by Michael, he's trying to take all decisions on behalf of the people, and claiming that he's doing reform, and stop clapping for him and praising him and allowing him to continue with these repressions with all of that normalizations and whitewashing. Those people they are attending, and they are keep saying, we have seen people inside the country, they are happy, and not everyone complaining, and there's people they are complaining, but there's other people they are happy. Those people who repeating this propaganda from the regime, they are participating in the violations, and if they are choose to participate, they must be vocal, they must be criticizing the violations, they must talk about the situation honestly, without just thinking about how to be in the middle between the wrong and the right. Being in the middle between the right and the wrong, that means you are in the wrong side.
Thank you very much, Yahya. And Arij, so far, all of collective efforts to demand the release of prisoners are going unanswered. And so how can we, or maybe what other avenues are available to us, or can we explore to maximize pressure on the Saudi authorities and secure the prisoners' release, including your brother?
Yes, so like you mentioned, all the collective effort and trying to, bring our voices from outside to release my brother and the many other innocents is not working. We're not getting any response from the Saudi officials. The IGF taking place in Riyadh, I think it's an opportunity to bring those voices inside, to bring those questions inside. And that's where, what we want from whether government officials, organizations, private, sector, whoever really cares about the principles of internet governance that drove them to actually attend the event in Riyadh, have to really keep in mind that, like Yahya mentioned, only a few kilometers away, my brother and many others are living in a very, very horrible situation. Torture, forced disappearance, solitary confinement, just because they tweeted. So what they could do to help is ask in that forum, ask in those meetings to free my brother Abdurrahman Sadhan and all the other innocent people who've been imprisoned for tweeting or expressing their opinions online. I think this is an opportunity to bring the voices inside and remind that, the Saudi officials of the principles of internet governance, and really push for actual reforms to allow, to protect people's freedoms and privacy online, and to allow freedom of expression. And just like if they just Googled principles of internet governance, they will see all these values, amazing values that should be protected, while in fact Saudi Arabia is not. It's doing the complete opposite. So it's a responsibility actually, for people who are attending to bring these issues to the table and discuss them. And again, it's very important to mention the cases by names, because it really adds a face to the issue. It really brings attention to that we are educated about what's going on in terms of human rights violation. We're not just repeating what's being said, in the media or outside. No, we know about these cases, individual cases. We know about Abdurrahman Sadhan. We know about Salma Shihab. We know about Manahel al-Utaibi. We know about all these other cases who've been forcibly disappeared, tortured, denied any, fair, even access to legal access, and, tortured over the years. Also, Turkey Al-Jazir. There are many cases not even are famous out there that this could help a lot of the cases to be protected and freed. So yeah, this is basically our ask. And I know we talk about boycotting, but unfortunately, we just leave the chance for those who are going there for personal gains, and then we don't bring the actual voices to challenge and discuss these issues, and just allow the Saudi officials to go with their plan of whitewashing and covering those abuses.
Thank you, Arij. And Michael, lastly with you, what should companies and investors who have or plan to have business ties with the Saudi government or state-owned enterprises do?
Yeah, a recommendation and a comment. I mean, what many of us as human rights or digital rights organizations call for is that businesses need to do due diligence throughout their operations, right? They have responsibilities, not just states which have obligations. They have responsibilities to mitigate and protect human rights, for in all their operations. And I would say that that's something that's critical, especially in Saudi Arabia, given that everything from on the digital side to on migrant worker side, the laws themselves are not sufficient in protecting, even when they're respected, and they're often not. I think the comment I would make is, especially for businesses, is just from a more practical, like I think it's important to talk on the kind of practical side. Why are human rights important? And I think that, even in a self-interest side, is that someday it could be you. There were 2 management consultancy companies that had their employees essentially threatened with jail time in Saudi Arabia because they were asked to testify in US Congress to reveal details about their work in Saudi Arabia. The brands that are associated with the 2034 World Cup, I think some of them are making bets that, we'll be able to ride it out, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes people absolutely hold it against you, and it becomes a huge cost and a catastrophe, in terms of brand perspective. The idea of one man essentially making major decisions on business and economic ventures, the problem is that goes wrong a lot of the time. That's why checks and balances are useful. And so businesses really can suffer consequences when there's an arbitrariness to decision-making and rule, right? And they can suffer from it directly. So I would say it's critical that you have your own high standards on due diligence, because there really are risks that you're entering into when you make agreements, including with the PIF. But 2 is, I think there's a larger concern that businesses should take in mind when they think about this in business environment, because human rights aren't just not just a moral feel-good. They also have often a substantive practical value because it protects everyone involved. And I think that's a risk that businesses should really be mindful of when they're thinking about doing work in Saudi Arabia.
And
Thank you.
sorry, Marwa, just to venture to comment on what Michael mentioned for businesses. It's very important to remember that in 2017, once Mohammed bin Salman came to power, he rounded up the business tycoons inside Saudi Arabia and forcibly took their assets, their financial assets within Saudi Arabia. He couldn't take, of course, the assets outside, but he forced them to sign the transfer of their assets within Saudi Arabia to the PIF or to companies owned by Mohammed bin Salman. So this is very dangerous in terms of even assets management within Saudi Arabia, to basically make sure that your business ventures, whatever investments that you're doing, are protected by a due process or fairness and legal system, which does not exist inside Saudi Arabia.
Thank you so much, Hala, Arij, Yahya, and Michael, for your input and also for your recommendations. We have about 5 minutes to answer questions, so I do apologize in advance that the answers will be brief. I have to acknowledge a couple of questions around Access Now's decision not to go to the IGF this year. So I just want to clarify that before we took this decision, we had consulted very closely with our civil society partners, and namely Saudi activists, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our participation is reflective of the reality on the ground and the needs of the people who are most impacted by those conversations. And after going back and forth, Saudi activists said, and Arij already mentioned, and I think that also answers a second question that we got, whether it's best to boycott the event altogether or to take the opportunity to shed light on the human rights crisis. And that was indeed the position of Saudi activists, that it's better to participate and raise those human rights concerns than to leave the space empty, basically, for the Saudi authorities to do what they want to do, and that is to whitewash their human rights record. So on that, from that perspective, we're not going in person, because also for safety and security reasons, but we will be participating remotely with a very few select sessions that shed light on some of the issues we discussed today. There was also a question about why Access Now is not going to Saudi Arabia, but is going to or attended Ethiopia or the IGF in Ethiopia, even though there was also another tragic situation there. Again, those decisions we take very seriously in consultation with our civil society partners. And Ethiopia, while tragic, is also a context where there was a complete internet shutdown for 2 years in the Tigray region, and we found it as an important opportunity to campaign through our Keep It On coalition at the IGF, calling on all participants and including governments to ensure that the communications shutdown is lifted, and to listen to the voices of the people who have been directly impacted by those shutdowns. So I hope this answers that question. There's also a question on who should decide which countries should not become IGF hosts, whether it be the IGF MAG, the IGF community. Maybe we can also just simply say that the reason why Saudi Arabia was the host of this year's conference is because they are footing the bill. They offered to host it, which states do, and that is, I think, a missed opportunity. I think governments that genuinely care about human rights should seek an opportunity, to compete for hosting the IGF. For example, I think Russia was trying to host the next IGF for 2025, and then Norway stepped in. And so I think it's a call really for states to step up their game and ensure that those conversations are happening on right, respecting soil. I think, and also the UN should also allow the IGF MAG group, the multi-stakeholder advisory group, and also the larger community in the role of selections, and that it's done also in more transparency. obviously now those decisions do take place behind closed doors, and so there are definitely reflections to be made around the process of selecting the host country. I don't know if any of our speakers would like to add to this question in particular, but if not, there's also a question on how many prisoners of conscience have been detained or prosecuted in 2024, and has it really reached an unprecedented level? So maybe I will start with you, Yahya, if you have figures from Al-Qasd around the number of detainees at large, and if there are specific numbers for 2024.
Thank you. We always trying to avoid the numbers because there is no transparency. And in the past, also with ACPRA, we tried our best to have some figures and to calculate some numbers by some methods. Later on, we noticed that these methods was not the best to have these calculations, because basically the regime, when they arrest someone, they threat the people and they targeted even their family, their friends, not to talk to any NGOs or human rights defenders. But I can give you one example. Some media, they did interview with Mohammed bin Salman, and they, before the interview, they asked us about the numbers, and we told them we are avoiding to tell numbers, but in 2018 there is mass arrest. In September, it was they arrested around 150 persons, and those people, most of them, they are high figures. So we thought we got good numbers at that time. And when they asked Mohammed bin Salman about this, and they said to him in the interview, recently you arrested more than 150 or around this number, and he said no, it is not 150, it is 1,500. And he started to arguing and defending his decision, but he sent a message to us that we just know about around 10% of the violations. So we always trying to avoid the numbers, because nobody can visit the prisons, nobody can get real numbers. Even when we are talking about executions, it is very important to mention that we are publishing numbers, but we have these numbers from the Saudi officials when they published about it. But one time in the last year, the human rights delegation, they met with Amnesty International, and they gave them another figure. It was higher than what's published. So we noticed that for us, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and Al-Qasd, the numbers that we have and the numbers that we gathered, it is much less than the reality. And for that, we are trying to put the lights on the cases itself, rather than on the numbers. That's no way to have these numbers.
And sorry, just to add one thing to what Yahya mentioned, Marwa, is the access to information, which is at the core of having accessible internet, or basically good governance, internet good governance in any country. Access to information has been one of the most difficult things to do in a justice system, not only in terms of the detainees, but as Michael mentioned, also in terms of accessing information, and on the ground regarding whether it's related to technology, related to how people are perception of people. So those kinds of propaganda that has been orchestrated in Saudi Arabia in terms of the progress, the vibrant society, the celebrities coming to Saudi Arabia to change basically the atmosphere of the Wahhabis, the previously Wahhabis, basically feel into something that is more modern, more global. These are things that are not really real when it comes to basically getting what people are perceiving, or perception of people, perception of the Saudi people, because you can never know without access to information. And this is what's really missing. And this is what, of course, what is reflected in terms of how many people, how much we know and how many people are being targeted for what they posted online. We as activists abroad are very much, stunned by the numbers, basically the people that we knew, and we just find out that someone has been arrested. And we didn't know that this person has been arrested. This is someone who has been very much close to the regime, but they have been arrested. And of course, we are very much, alarmed by this kind of, fanatic pursuits of people for merely expressing, the most mild opinions, if you would think of it. So even for us as activists, it's very much alarming as well.
Thank you, Hala and Yahya. And actually, that's a good reminder for states who are either present through diplomatic missions or attending the IGF to demand access to visit prisons or to attend trials of human rights defenders, as well as to pressure the Saudi authorities to allow UN human rights mechanisms and bodies and special rapporteurs to enter the country and to be able to investigate and collect information about all these human rights abuses. We are slightly over time, so I want to thank you, Hala, Yahya, Arij, and Michael for being with us today and for again shedding light on the multi-layers of Saudi repression. And again, it's a call, and I join my colleagues here. It's a call that we should reiterate on those attending IGF, and especially those who have power, to ensure that those cases are raised and not to be dismissed, and in the name of pragmatism or under the guise of multi-stakeholderism. These are difficult conversations that need to be had in order to have a meaningful, really truly meaningful discussions around the internet we want and advancing truly human rights in the digital age. Thank you again, everyone. And for those who have joined us today, there will be a recording of this event on our YouTube channel. And I wish everyone a very pleasant evening or day, depending on where they are.